There we go. So I'd like to thank all of you for having me here today. I was really excited to be asked to speak. Again, I'm Anna Farrell-Sherman. I'm the Clean Water Associate with Environment Texas. I work at a nonprofit that's statewide in Texas that works to help protect clean water, clean air, and open spaces across the state. And my work to protect our waterways has been focused on nature-based infrastructure, green infrastructure for about a year now. So I'm really excited to share with y'all some of the projects that we've worked on, some of the collaborations, and how we can use nature-based infrastructure, all these features that we've been talking about all day to really transform our communities. So this is just a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give a quick introduction to myself and to Environment Texas and how our work as a nonprofit can help to increase the amount of nature-based features in our communities. And I talked just briefly about the system of nature-based infrastructure. We had such a good introduction to it from Dana. It was an amazing presentation, so thank you for that. I'll just give a little bit of a brief look from the nonprofit side before going into a couple of projects that I've worked on here in Texas, and then looking at where this could take us in the future. So to start off, as I said before, I'm the Clean Water Associate with Environment Texas. So that means that my job is to help protect our communities from environmental degradation and to help preserve our environment. And I lead our clean water team, our clean water programs. So I wanted to kind of briefly touch on why we focus on nature-based infrastructure and green infrastructure as a way to help protect clean water. And it really comes from looking at what are the water concerns in Texas. And I think they can be divided pretty much into these three categories: water quality, flooding, and drought. And all three of them are big issues in Texas. The fact on water quality is from the TCEQ, 780 miles of streams and rivers are impaired just due to stormwater runoff. And as we heard on Tuesday, the amount of impaired streams is only increasing in Texas. There's also flooding. 1 in 10 Texans faces moderate or high risk from river floods. That's from the Texas Water Development Board. And that's crazy. There should not be 1 in 10 people in our state who are risking their homes, their livelihoods to floodwaters. And drought is a little bit less prominently on our mind right now. I think only 18% of Texans are currently experiencing a drought, but we know that droughts are going to continue to get worse and more severe over the next century and towards the end of this century. And my job as an environmental activist is to work to protect our communities and protect our environment from these concerns. And that's where nature-based infrastructure comes in. And I want to really briefly say I use nature-based infrastructure. It's also called green infrastructure, low impact development. But what I'm referring to is the features we've been talking about all day. Anything that can let stormwater slow down, soak into the soil, and helps to provide all of these benefits to our communities. So really quickly, here's some of the benefits of nature-based infrastructure. Dana touched on a lot of these already, but I wanted to provide them here, and just a couple quick facts, because this is often how we, as a nonprofit, talk about these amazing benefits. And I'll say that we have fact sheets, and I can give you this slide if you're working to try to talk to people at your organizations or people you're working with about why these features are so important. They can help with water quality, preventing water pollution, to climate change, helping to sequester carbon, to helping to improve our mental health, reducing anxiety by adding green spaces to our cities. So with all of these benefits, the question then becomes, why isn't this what we're doing? Why isn't this the way that we're managing stormwater in our communities? And really the answer is that it's new and that we're slowly figuring out how to do it. and there's still a lot of questions around it. So I'm gonna talk briefly about some of the projects here in Texas that I've been able to work on that help to increase the amount of nature-based infrastructure and green infrastructure that folks like y'all are building across our communities. And in my work, one of the really amazing things about being an activist is I get to talk to a whole bunch of different people and ask them, what do they need? How can I help in their work? And the two things that kept coming up again and again were funding and knowledge and sharing of data and resources. So I'm going to talk about two projects, one that relates to funding and one that relates to sharing of data and resources, just give you an idea of how useful and beneficial these collaborations can be. So the first one I wanted to talk about is related to funding. And we approached the Texas Water Development Board, which gives out funding for water infrastructure across the state, as y'all are, I'm sure, very familiar with. And there are other different agencies in different states. But we have here in Texas a brand new fund called the Flood Infrastructure Fund. It's created after Hurricane Harvey and provides money for flood infrastructure. And we said, well, if we're going to be spending millions of dollars on flood infrastructure, we should make sure that some of it is going to these nature-based features that we know provide so many benefits in addition to helping with flooding. And so we were able to work with the board members themselves, meet with a couple of them. We worked with coalitions. We wrote letters about what the different language in the rules to the fund should be. We held a workshop. The picture of me presenting earlier was from this workshop we held on nature-based infrastructure and how it works and how we could push for it in the state. And while there was nothing about nature-based infrastructure in the draft rules of the fund, the final rules designated how this money will be spent included a couple different mentions of it, included a definition of nature-based solutions. It prioritizes projects that have nature-based infrastructure built into them in kind of the ranking system for ranking projects. And it requires proposals for new projects to consider how nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, could be incorporated into those projects. This is a really big win for green infrastructure in Texas because it is a place where people can go and turn to and say, this is a way for me to get funding for these projects. And even if people haven't considered using these features before, they can start to see how useful they can be in their communities. So that's the funding piece of it. And now I want to talk a little bit about how to share data and resources. And this is one project. We released our Texas Stormwater Scorecard earlier this year. And this is a report that ranks cities in Texas on how well their local policy supports nature-based stormwater management. And we surveyed local governments across the state. These are the ones that were covered in the 2020 version. And I know there are people from some of these cities here on the at the training today, and some of them have already seen the results from the survey, but I wanted to share the results with y'all. They go over a whole bunch of different types of regulations and categories. I don't have time to go into all of the different categories, but if you're interested, for sure, let me know. And here are the results. And you'll see there might be a couple things that are surprising about these rankings. You'll see that San Antonio and Austin are tied for first place, which might surprise some people based on Austin's kind of reputation as an extremely eco-friendly city, but San Antonio is right up there as well. You might also be surprised that the scores seem a little bit lower than might be expected. And that's because we were comparing these cities to the global standard for green infrastructure policy. And we still have a ways to go in Texas, and I think across EPA Region 6. But one of my favorite pieces of working on this project was seeing how many amazing ideas folks across the state have and when it comes to nature-based infrastructure, and getting to share some of those ideas. So I wanted to share a couple of highlights with you. These are just 3. There are a whole bunch more. But to get you excited about some of the things that various cities are thinking about, Dallas is talking about a possible requirement for green infrastructure to deal with stormwater management. They would be the first city in Texas to have a citywide requirement. San Antonio requires it along the San Antonio River, but not throughout the city. It would be really exciting if we see that happen in Dallas in the next couple months. San Marcos has a really cool educational maintenance program. One of the issues with nature-based infrastructure is that people don't know how to maintain it. It's new and they haven't learned that yet. But San Marcos, when these features fail inspections, instead of just giving a fine or telling them they need to fix it, they host educational workshops and help to teach people how to help to maintain their features. And then the last really exciting project is from El Paso, and I really love this project. It's still an idea and hasn't quite been implemented yet, but I really, really liked it, so I wanted to share. They said, we don't have a ton of money to really invest in nature-based infrastructure right now, but what we can do is every place in our city where we see water pooling on the street, let's make a curb cut into the planting on the side of the street and plant a tree. It's a really simple way to put nature-based features where they're most needed in the city and to help provide green space throughout the city that has all of those other benefits that we talked about, reducing urban heat, helping to infiltrate water into the soil, and preserve the gray infrastructure that the city does depend on. So those are just 3 highlights. There's, of course, a lot more, and I encourage you to try this in your own local community. We have the rubric. You can, if you Google Texas Stormwater Scorecard 2020, it'll come up, and you can use this rubric to look at policy in your own city and get ideas for, okay, how could we increase the amount of nature-based infrastructure just by changing the rules that govern stormwater infrastructure in our city. So that is the second project I wanted to talk to you about. And I wanted to turn just briefly to what this could mean for our communities across Texas and across the region. And I think that we're going to see more and more collaborations between groups like mine that does activism and all of y'all who work on the management and on the engineering behind these features. And I think that we have a choice. Here are 2 pictures. I got both of these off Google. And there's a couple differences between them. What I did was I Googled utopia is this one with all the green and the light. I Googled dystopia to find this gray and bleak-looking picture. And there are some differences in lighting, things like that. But the biggest difference between these 2 images is the green space. And I think that as stormwater managers, we have a really exciting opportunity to use green infrastructure, to use nature-based infrastructure to create this utopia version, this beautiful city with nature-based infrastructure throughout the city that has less flooding, less drought, less erosion, helps to sequester carbon, helps to improve our mental health by bringing nature to our cities. So the question, what is next for stormwater management? I think that we're going to see increasing amounts of nature-based infrastructure. And I'm hopeful that collaborations between groups like mine and all of y'all can help to make that happen. So that's what I have for y'all today. This is my email. If you have questions, if you want kind of fact sheets, if you want any of the information, more information about the projects that I was talking about today, please reach out. I'd be happy to share more, and I'd love to hear what cool projects y'all are working on outside of Texas as well as within the state. So thank you very much, and I believe we'll have time for questions after the next presentation. So I look forward to hearing from y'all.